I confronted my husband about having an affair with my married friend. He went pale and asked, "Does her husband know?" I said, "He's the one who helped me prove it." Then I showed him what we'd uncovered about their financial exit plan, and his panic turned into rage. But getting to that moment took weeks. For most of that time, I was still sleeping beside a man who had no idea I knew. Matthew and I had been married for 10 years. Claire and her husband, Ben, had been together even longer. Claire wasn't my closest friend, but she was close enough that our lives overlapped constantly. Dinners, birthdays, backyard parties, holidays. The usual married couple friendships where eventually everyone knows a little too much about everyone else. Claire knew when Matthew and I were having problems. I knew when she and Ben were struggling. There had been nights when Claire complained about Ben and I defended him. There had been nights when I complained about Matthew and Claire told me I was lucky to have someone dependable. That word bothered me later. Dependable. Because the first thing I noticed was how suddenly dependable Matthew became whenever Claire was involved. We were supposed to meet several friends for dinner one Saturday. A few hours beforehand, Claire messaged the group saying Ben might not make it. I mentioned it to Matthew. He barely looked up. "Maybe we should skip it too." I asked why. He said he was tired. Then Claire sent another message. Ben definitely wasn't coming, but she still was. Suddenly Matthew wasn't tired. He showered, changed his shirt, asked whether I was ready. I remember watching him and thinking, why do you care so much whether Claire is there? Then I immediately felt guilty. She was my friend. He was my husband. I didn't want to become suspicious because my husband enjoyed talking to another woman. So I ignored it. At dinner, Matthew somehow ended up sitting beside Claire. Nothing dramatic happened. They talked. They laughed. At one point she touched his arm. Then Matthew mentioned a restaurant Claire had wanted to try. I asked, when did she tell you about that? He shrugged. You were there. Maybe I had been. That was the problem. Every individual moment had an innocent explanation. Only when I put them together did something feel wrong. After that, I noticed a pattern. If Claire and Ben canceled plans, Matthew suddenly lost interest too. If Claire came without Ben, Matthew became more social. He remembered things about her that I didn't remember hearing. Places she wanted to visit. Problems with her family. Little preferences that seemed strangely specific. Whenever I asked how he knew something, he always had an answer. You told me. She mentioned it last time. Ben said something. Nothing I could challenge without sounding paranoid. Then Matthew started talking about money. That was harder to dismiss. We had always managed our finances together without much conflict. We had shared accounts, small personal accounts, savings, retirement funds, and an investment we'd held for years. Suddenly he wanted to change everything. One night he sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, I think we should start separating more of our finances. I looked at him. Why? It just makes sense. After 10 years? That doesn't mean everything has to stay combined forever. I asked what had changed. He said nothing. Then he used a phrase that stayed in my head. We should be more independent financially. Independent. A few days later, he suggested selling our investment. I asked why. He said he wanted more flexibility. Then he started asking how much I had in my personal savings account. Not casually. He wanted actual numbers. I asked why he suddenly cared. He became defensive. You're making this weird. I'm asking because you've brought up money almost every day. I'm just trying to be responsible. I wanted to believe him. Then Ben messaged me. I was shopping when my phone buzzed. This is going to sound strange, but has Matthew been acting different lately? I stared at the message. My stomach dropped before I even replied. There are questions that feel like questions. That one felt like confirmation. I typed different how. Ben called almost immediately. I stepped outside and answered. He sounded uncomfortable. Not angry. Not dramatic. Uneasy. Claire had been acting differently for the past couple of months. She wanted her own bank account. She had started saying their marriage felt restrictive. Then he said she kept talking about needing more independence. I stopped him. Did she actually use that word? Yeah. Why? Because Matthew keeps saying we should be more financially independent. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Ben told me something worse. Claire had been using me as an excuse to leave the house. He said, she told me you two had dinner last Thursday. We didn't. A pause. She said you did. I haven't seen her alone in weeks. Then Ben gave me another date. Claire had told him she was meeting me that evening. I remembered it immediately. Matthew had supposedly been working late. Say the date again. He did. Same night. There was a long silence. Finally, Ben said, okay. I closed my eyes. So we're not imagining this. My first instinct was to confront Matthew immediately. I wanted to go home, demand his phone, and force him to explain himself. Ben told me not to. That irritated me. You expect me to go home and pretend? No. I think we need to understand what's happening before they know we're suspicious. I don't care about strategy. You might after I tell you this. Claire had been asking very specific questions about divorce. Not emotional questions. Financial ones. Their house. Retirement accounts. Savings. What happened to shared money? What she could access if they separated. Ben originally assumed she was asking for a friend. Then he noticed the examples she used matched their own finances almost exactly. That was when Matthew's recent behavior clicked into place. The separate accounts. The investment. The questions about my savings. This might not just be an affair. They could already be preparing to leave. Ben had scheduled a consultation with an attorney. Not because he had decided to file. Because he wanted to understand where he stood before confronting Claire. He suggested I do the same. No hiding money. No emptying accounts. No revenge spending. Just understand what existed, preserve records I already had legal access to, and make sure I wasn't blindsided. I hated how much sense it made. We agreed on 2 weeks. 14 days. We wouldn't confront either of them. We would compare only information we already had legitimate access to. Then we would decide what came next. Those 14 days were some of the strangest of my marriage. Matthew still kissed me goodbye every morning. He still asked what I wanted for dinner. He still complained when I left cabinet doors open. He still reached for me in bed. And every ordinary thing felt contaminated by one question. Where were you really? One evening, he came home with food from my favorite place. I figured you wouldn't want to cook. For a moment, I almost broke. Maybe Ben and I were feeding each other's suspicion. Maybe we were wrong. Then Matthew placed his phone face down on the counter. He had never been protective of it before. Now it stayed beside him constantly. He carried it into the bathroom. He kept it close while he slept. I started noticing details I wished I didn't notice. Ben and I kept our conversations practical. Schedules. Receipts. Things our spouses had told us. Claire said she was at a fitness class one evening. Matthew said he was meeting someone for a drink. Their cards showed charges at the same restaurant. Another night Matthew claimed he had stayed late because of work. There was a hotel charge on an account we both used. When I asked about it casually, he said the hotel had been connected to a work event. I nodded. Claire told Ben she was spending a Saturday with her sister. Her purchases showed her going in the opposite direction. Matthew happened to be unavailable most of that afternoon. Still, I wanted something undeniable. Then Matthew left an older tablet charging in our home office. It was a shared household device. We both used it. I picked it up because I needed a document we kept there. His messages had synced. Claire's name wasn't there. But I recognized her number. My hands went cold. I opened the thread. I had spent days telling myself I wanted certainty. The second I got it, I wanted to go back to not knowing. The messages went back weeks. Some were ordinary. Jokes. Complaints. Plans to meet. Then I found the conversations about leaving. Matthew had sent Claire apartment listings. They discussed what kind of place they could afford. Claire talked about furniture. Matthew talked about waiting until the timing was right. They discussed what each divorce might cost. They weren't just having an affair. They were building their next life while Ben and I were still living the current one with them. Then I found the message that changed everything for me. Matthew had written, "We just need to make sure we're not trapped financially when they find out." They, Ben and me, like we were obstacles. The affair hurt. But realizing Matthew was trying to prepare himself financially while keeping me completely blind did something different to me. He wasn't only planning to leave. He wanted a head start. I was supposed to keep living normally until he had everything arranged. I preserved the information I was legally allowed to keep, then put the tablet back exactly where I found it. That evening Matthew sat beside me on the couch. "You okay?" "I'm tired." He rubbed my shoulder. "Go to bed early." That small act of affection hurt more than anger would have. The next morning I messaged Ben. "I found it." He called. I told him about the apartment listings. Then I told him about the financial message. He went quiet. Finally, he said, Claire's been asking how quickly she could access money if we separated. That confirmed what we already feared. They were preparing. By then, both of us had spoken to separate attorneys. The advice I received was straightforward. Don't drain shared accounts. Don't hide assets. Don't make financial decisions simply because you're angry. Document what exists. Keep copies of records I already have access to. Protect future income according to legal advice. So that's what I did. I opened an individual account for future income as advised. I didn't touch our existing shared balances. I copied financial records. I documented accounts, investments, and debts. For the first time since Ben contacted me, I felt like Matthew wasn't several moves ahead. During those 2 weeks, Ben and I also started talking about things that had nothing to do with money. It happened one night when he messaged, "Do you ever feel stupid?" I stared at it, then typed, "Constantly." That opened something. We talked about replaying old dinners, old conversations, moments that probably meant something very different to Matthew and Claire than they had to us. Ben admitted he kept asking himself whether he had caused Claire to look elsewhere. I had been doing the same thing, because the messages also contained their version of our marriages. I was cold, emotionally distant, too focused on stability. I supposedly didn't appreciate Matthew. Ben was controlling, negative, impossible to please. Some complaints came from real flaws. I do shut down when I'm hurt. Ben admitted he could be overly cautious about money. Neither of us believed we had been perfect spouses. But problems in a marriage and secretly building another relationship are not the same thing. I told Ben, apparently I became a terrible wife exactly when Matthew needed a reason to think I deserved this. Ben gave a tired laugh. Claire decided I was a terrible husband around the same time. That was probably when we actually became friends. Nothing romantic. Neither of us was capable of that then. It was just relief. Someone else understood without needing the whole story explained. 14 days after Ben first contacted me, we agreed it was time. Same evening. Separate confrontations. Neither Matthew nor Claire would have a chance to warn the other. Matthew came home around 6. He put his keys on the counter and asked what we were having for dinner. "We need to talk first." He stopped moving. I sat at the table. He stayed standing. I had copies of a few charges in front of me. Nothing theatrical. Just enough. "I know about Claire." Matthew stared at me. "What?" "You heard me." He shook his head. "I don't know what you're talking about." Even then, he denied it. I slid the first statement across the table. Then another. The restaurant. The hotel. The matching dates. He barely looked at them. "You're misunderstanding this. I've seen the messages too." His face changed. He sat down slowly. "How much did you see?" "Not, are you okay?" "Not, I'm sorry." "How much did you see?" "Enough." He rubbed both hands over his face. Then came the question I'll probably remember forever. "Does Ben know?" I stared at him. That was what frightened him. I said, "He's the one who helped me prove it." Matthew went pale. "Oh my God." I placed a copy of the financial message in front of him. "We know you were preparing before leaving." He looked at the page, then at me. His panic turned into anger. "You've been talking to Ben?" "Yes." "For how long?" 2 weeks. "You two have been coordinating behind our backs?" For a second, I genuinely thought I had heard him wrong. I said, "Do you hear yourself? That's different. You were planning an apartment with my married friend. You went through private messages. They appeared on a shared device. You had no right to share our financial information with him." I shared only what I was legally allowed to access, after getting advice. Matthew shook his head. "This is calculated." I laughed once. "You were asking how much money I had in savings while planning to leave me for Claire. You don't understand the context." "I understand the apartment listings." He looked away. "I understand the hotel." "Nothing. And I understand the message where you said you needed to make sure you weren't financially trapped when Ben and I found out." He finally looked at me. "So don't act offended because I stopped letting you decide when I was allowed to know my own marriage was ending." Matthew said he had never intended to leave me with nothing. I said, "That's an incredibly low standard." His phone rang. "Claire." We both looked at the screen. He let it stop. Then it rang again. I knew exactly what was happening. Ben had confronted her. Matthew answered and walked into another room. His voice was low and urgent. When he returned, he was furious. "You planned this together." "Yes." He looked at me like I was the one who had betrayed him. That was the moment I knew the marriage was finished. Not because of one message. Because even after being caught, his biggest concern was what Ben and I had done in response. Matthew slept in another room that night. The next day, he left. Claire started calling me. I ignored her. Then came the messages. She accused me of humiliating her. She said I had betrayed our friendship by discussing private things she had told me with Ben. I almost responded. I wanted to ask which betrayal she thought deserved priority. I didn't. Ben told me Claire's confrontation had gone almost exactly like mine. She denied it. Then asked whether Matthew knew. Then became furious that Ben and I had been talking. Within weeks, both divorces were underway. That was when Matthew and Claire's fantasy met reality. From their messages, they seemed to believe the difficult part would be hiding the affair until they were prepared. They imagined arranging their money, finding a place, then telling us once everything was manageable. Instead, both marriages collapsed at once. 2 divorces. 2 households to divide. 2 sets of legal expenses. 2 families asking questions. Friends suddenly reconsidering months of strange behavior. The comfortable exit they had planned disappeared. Matthew eventually moved into an apartment. Claire moved in with him. For a while, that hurt more than I expected. I had spent months finding out my marriage was a lie, and now they were apparently moving forward with the future they had planned. But my own divorce demanded enough attention that I eventually stopped following theirs. Ben and I stayed in contact. Once the immediate financial issues settled, though, we deliberately stopped talking every day. We both understood how vulnerable we were. I didn't want to replace Matthew with the one man who understood why Matthew had hurt me. Ben didn't want to replace Claire with the one woman who understood what she had done. So we gave each other space. Every couple of weeks, one of us would check in. "How did the meeting go? You doing okay? Everything sorted with the account?" Nothing flirtatious. We were friends. Meanwhile, Matthew and Claire discovered a problem they apparently hadn't considered. They knew exactly how capable the other person was of lying. Several months after the confrontation, Ben called me. "You're going to appreciate this." "What happened?" "Claire thinks Matthew is cheating on her." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Matthew had become protective of his phone. He was getting messages late, coming home later than expected. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe there wasn't. Nobody actually knew. But Claire didn't believe him. I said, "She knows what he looks like when he lies." Ben laughed. "Pretty much." And Matthew didn't trust Claire either. He knew she had tried to prepare financially before leaving Ben. She knew he had lied to me for months while behaving normally at home. Every late night became suspicious. Every unexplained message raised questions. Every private conversation had the possibility of another secret behind it. They had built their relationship through secrecy, then discovered how difficult it was to feel secure inside it. They lasted 8 months living together. Then Claire moved out. Ben told me over coffee. Claire left Matthew. I looked at him. Already? Last weekend. I tried not to smile. I failed. That was faster than I expected. Ben laughed. Honestly, same. I had imagined their breakup would feel like victory. It didn't. I felt vindicated, maybe. Mostly I felt finished. They had spent months believing life would be easier once Ben and I were gone. Then they got exactly what they wanted. No spouses in the way. No hiding. No excuses. Just each other. Apparently, that wasn't enough. My divorce was finalized first. Ben's followed a couple of months later. Almost a year had passed since his first message. A few weeks after everything was legally finished, Ben asked if I wanted dinner. Just the 2 of us. I knew immediately it felt different. We had eaten together before. Coffee after meetings. Quick lunches. Group gatherings. This was Friday night. No paperwork. No crisis. No excuse. I almost said no. Then I said yes. For most of dinner, we avoided talking about Matthew and Claire. We talked about movies. Travel. Things we wanted to do now that our lives didn't revolve around lawyers and failed marriages. Then Ben looked across the table. "This feels weird." I laughed. "Very. Bad weird." "I don't know." He nodded. "Same." After dinner, we stood beside my car longer than necessary. There was no kiss. Finally, I said, I don't want us doing something just because we went through the same thing. Neither do I. And I don't want them using this to rewrite everything. Ben understood. If we got together, Matthew and Claire could tell themselves there had always been something between us. Maybe everyone had crossed the same lines. Maybe their affair wasn't really different. I didn't want to give them that excuse. Ben said, then we don't do anything. So we didn't. For 3 months. We stayed friends. I went on one date with someone else. It went nowhere. Ben saw someone briefly. That went nowhere too. Then one weekend, he asked if I wanted to go hiking. I said yes. For most of the day, we didn't talk about our divorces. And that was when I finally understood something. I liked being around Ben even when there was no crisis connecting us. At one point, we stopped to rest. He looked at me. I still want to take you to dinner. We already had dinner. He smiled. You know what I mean. I did. Every reason not to do it ran through my head. The history. The gossip. Our exes. The possibility that shared pain had created feelings neither of us would otherwise have. But I also thought about the previous year. Ben had never pressured me. He never flirted while I was still married. He never used my anger at Matthew to get closer. When I needed space, he gave it. He had been there during one of the worst periods of my life without trying to make himself the answer to it. So I said, okay. We started slowly. At first, we didn't tell anyone. Not because we were ashamed. We wanted to know whether this was real before inviting everybody else into it. After a couple of months, we told a few close friends. Some were happy. Others looked uncomfortable. One finally asked the question everyone else was probably thinking. Are you sure nothing was going on before? I hated hearing it. But I understood why she asked. No. She still looked uncertain. I said, we barely spoke privately before we discovered the affair. That was the truth. Eventually Matthew found out. He called me. I almost ignored him. Curiosity won. So you and Ben are together? Yes. Silence. Then a short laugh. So this was the plan all along? No. Come on. It wasn't. You secretly coordinated against us, stayed close afterward, and now you're together. You skipped the part where you and Claire were having an affair. That isn't the point. It's exactly the point. Matthew said Ben and I had probably become emotionally involved before the divorces were complete. I told him talking to someone who had discovered the same betrayal wasn't an affair. Then he said, you're no better than us. That bothered me. Maybe because I had already asked myself the same question. So I asked him a few things. Did I lie about where I was so I could secretly meet Ben? He didn't answer. Did Ben use you as an excuse so he could spend nights with me? Silence. Did we research apartments while pretending everything was normal at home? Matthew finally said, that's different. Yes, it is. Ben and I had gotten together after both marriages ended. No spouses were being deceived. No hotel charges. No secret apartment plans. No financial exit strategy. Matthew could hate the timing. He could hate how it looked. But he couldn't make those things equal. I ended the call. Claire reacted almost the same way with Ben. She told him our relationship proved something must have been happening before. Ben asked her when, considering we had barely spoken privately before discovering their affair. She didn't have an answer. I understand why both of them prefer that version. If Ben and I had secretly wanted each other all along, then everybody betrayed everybody. The story becomes easier for them. But that isn't what happened. Ben and I have been dating for almost a year now. We don't live together. We aren't rushing into marriage. Neither of us is trying to prove our relationship to anyone. The past still affects us sometimes. A changed plan can make one of us anxious. A late message can trigger questions neither of us wants to ask. But we talk about it. And once the divorces were behind us, we learned something important. Shared pain wasn't the only thing connecting us. Ben isn't my revenge against Matthew. He isn't a reward for surviving my divorce. He's someone I learned to trust when trusting another person felt like a terrible idea. And maybe that's what Matthew hates most. Not that I ended up with Ben. That I ended up okay. For months, I wanted Matthew to understand how badly he had hurt me. I wanted him to admit what he had done without excuses. I wanted to correct every story he told himself about why our marriage failed. Eventually, I stopped caring whether he understood. That was my closure. Matthew and Claire wanted to leave their marriages. They were free to make that choice. What they also wanted was time to prepare quietly while Ben and I remained unaware. They wanted their finances arranged, their next home planned, and their exit waiting before we knew there was anything to prepare for. Ben and I took that advantage away. We didn't empty accounts. We didn't hide assets. We didn't sabotage them. We got advice. We documented what already existed. We made sure we weren't blindsided. If that makes us calculated, then we were calculated. But there's a difference between revenge and refusing to stand still while someone quietly plans your future without you. Matthew and Claire got the freedom they wanted. They just didn't get the soft landing they expected. Ben and I got something neither of us had planned. Maybe our story will always look suspicious to some people. I can live with that. What I can't accept is the idea that protecting ourselves from a betrayal we didn't create somehow made us equally responsible for it. So did Ben and I cross a line by secretly coordinating before confronting our spouses and later getting together, or do Matthew and Claire only call us hypocrites because they lost control of how the story ended?